Hello, my name is Mrs. Engel, and I'm going to be reading La Linea, chapters 11, 12, and 13. For my students, we always look at the same things. We look at this chapter contributes to the plot of the story how, because who is doing what, why, and so. What does this show, prove, or reveal, and why is that important? Now, if I was reading, first of all, hablo un poquito español, so I do generally tend to skip the Spanish parts, so I apologize. If I was a student, I might even have like a sticky note or something up while I was listening or while I was reading the story so that I can kind of remember as I read. All right, so here we go. Chapter 11. It took me 3 hours to walk to the city, but it felt like minutes. I wanted to catch the bus north at noon, then I'd be slightly ahead of the timetable out by Don Clemente. I wandered around, peering into shop windows and pushing my way through the crowded stalls. The city was a crossroads for steady streams of people headed north, south, east, and west. Cars and trucks belched black exhaust that burned my eyes. The taxi drivers blasted their horns, and a loud womp womp of music blared from the speakers of the other cars. Mid-morning, I stood in the shade cast by the giant wall of the cathedral and pulled the last of the tacos out of my bag. The tortillas had turned hard and cold, but I ate every bite. 2 hours early, I found my way to the bus station. What if the seats were sold out? I didn't think I could stand to wait for the bus. I wasn't the only one worried. Dozens of anxious travelers sat by side, their belongings stacked to their feet. I bought my ticket, found a seat and a worn wooden bench, and I settled down to wait. So again, whenever I'm thinking about my who, it's always going to be Miguel. And I'm thinking, what? He bought his bus ticket. Okay. An older couple sat across from me. They propped their legs up on a huge, bulging suitcase. He wore an old black suit, the shoulders dusted by dirt. She too wore black, a long dress with shiny buttons. In her hand she held a small photograph, its edges tattered and worn. She caressed the face of the photo with her index finger. I decided that they must be going to a funeral of their only son. A young father and mother near my age sat on top of the two boxes tied together with a rope. They passed a baby back and forth, but it cried nonstop anyway. Two more string bags held some fruit and drinks, a bean pot, a box of soap. This was everything that they would own in the world. Sorry, I'm going to do something really quickly because I didn't realize I thought I did it for the whole document. I need to flip it so we can see them all the way that they're supposed to be. All right, I apologize for that. Here we go. He carried one small backpack held together in some places by duct tape and in others by crude hand stitching. Out he pulled a portable CD player. He fiddled with the earphones, adjusted the volume, and settled back, listened intently. Who was he? Where was he from? I finally decided that he was a tourist, probably not as poor as he looked. Several other men entered the bus. Each was single. Most traveled alone. I counted a total of 15 young men, including myself. I bet all of us had the same distinction, somewhere across La Linea. Here, we were together, close enough to touch. There, up north, one might go to Chicago, another to Atlanta or Michigan. Where were the other places I heard about? Oregon, Oklahoma, someplace called Little Rock, somewhere in the cities it seemed. Maybe others were states, I wasn't sure. There was California, of course. I knew all about California. Finally, another man sat right next to me. I let out a big sigh. I wanted to be alone so that I could stretch out a little and sleep. I knew I would need rest when I could. But he was barely seated before he started talking, a fast-flowing river of words, as if he had been starved for conversation. Hola, me llamo Javier. You can call me Yavi, he began. What's your name? I'm from El Salvador. You're from here, right? He paused only long enough to kick his backpack beneath the seat in front of him. He had silver hair and deep wrinkles around his mouth and the corner of his eyes. I looked closer. He was a lot older than anyone else on the bus. This is a good bus, I can tell already. You can always tell by the driver, he continued without taking a breath. I've been that broke down. Where are you going? Maybe we could go together. It's boring to travel alone. He looked at me hopefully. Don Clemente had warned me not to give away my route or my contacts. Besides, I didn't want the burden of another human being. So I lied. I'm going to the capital to stay with my brother and sister in law. Javier's shoulders slumped in disappointment, but within minutes his friendly talk started up again. Over the next hour, I found out that he came from the mountains of El Salvador somewhere. He used to work on a big coffee plantation. He left behind his wife and two children. I had no choice, he explained. The coffee prices went in the toilet. With no work and no money, what was I supposed to do? I'm going north to New York. That's where my brother works in a restaurant. He can get me a job. With a short amount of time, all money to send for the family. He paused momentarily and looked at me more closely. You must be about the same age as my boy Eduardo. He wanted to come with me, but of course he had to stay and help out the family. He wasn't happy about it. You're not going to the capital, are you? Javi said suddenly. It wasn't really a question. He hadn't believed my story. I'd always been a bad liar. You can come with me, he offered. He waited for me to answer. This is my second try. I've learned a few things, and sometimes it's good to have someone watch your back. I said a silent thanks to Don Clemente. With his people and his coyote, I didn't need anyone else. If Javier had already tried once and failed, I was better off by myself, alone. The last thing I wanted was an old man tagging along with me. How much help could he be, like the one I was on anyway? Gracias, I murmured. I've got my own plans. So this one says that he bought a bus ticket. He met Javier, but decided he was best to go to Linea on his own. Okay, so let's see if anything gets revealed or anything in chapter 12. I leaned my head against the dirt-streaked window and closed my eyes. What was Javi saying now? I quit paying attention. Words just bubbled out of his mouth. He didn't seem to notice that I wasn't really listening. I felt the bus stop, opened my eyes, straining through the grime. 3 federal police cruisers blocked the road in front of us, and a white transport bus stood empty by the side of the road. Javier sat up straight beside me. This is bad news, he said. The federales have a special internal procedure to look for people like me. People traveling through Mexico to get north. You're lucky, he continued. The federales won't bother you. After all, you're Mexican, a citizen. You belong here. I was relieved. I had my school identification, which should work for this check. But I was now suddenly worried for Javier. Pretend you're Mexican, I said. How will they know? He laughed. The first time I tried to come north, they tricked me with one of their questions. The ones that they use to separate people like me from the Mexican citizens. They asked me how many stars the Mexican flag has. I guessed, and I said 3. They laughed at me and sent me back to cross the border of Guatemala. Javier sighed loudly. Then he continued, But there's no end to tricks, is there? Besides, just listen to me. If they ask me talk, they'll know. It's true. His accent wasn't like mine, and not like any other accents that I heard before in Mexico. Okay, so far I'm just going to pause for a second. Remember, everything is always Miguel, always, all the time, because he's our main narrator, and it's told in first person. What? So in the what, you're always looking for an action. And this is kind of interesting. Da, 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 da. Let's see, where was it? It said he was worried. Worried is an action. So we can say Miguel is worried. Now, worried about what? Um, that Javier will be caught or sent back at the check. That Javier will be caught or sent back at the check. Okay, let's see if there's anything else that comes up in chapter 12. A fat federal boarded the bus slowly. His bulky figure blocked the front window. From under his cap, I saw his eyes move from passenger to passenger. He lifted the driver's microphone, his breathing still heavy from the short climb up the bus steps. Exit with your belongings. Line up at the side of the bus in single file, he commanded. His eyes continued to glide over us, checking to see who might resist. Everyone did exactly as he said. No one even complained. He smirked. To him, we were just a bunch of now under his control. Outside the bus, I found myself near the end of the line. The Federal strutted back and forth in front of the passengers. His name tag glinted in the sun. Captain Morales, it read, his gut hanging out over his belt. He clutched his clipboard importantly, tapping it rhythmically with his pen. This is a route check, he announced. I'll ask each of you a few questions, and then you'll be free to reboard the bus with your things. At the front of the line was a young couple with their baby. Morales asked them many questions, too many for a routine check. The father answered each quickly. Still, the captain continued to ask and ask again. I saw the father reach into his pocket. He turned his back to us, and I knew he was taking out money to pay off the Federal. He didn't want any trouble for his family. He just wanted to get where he was going. The captain was making an example out of the father. The message was loud and clear. Look how easy this can be, you poor fools. I can mess up your day, so don't make it hard on yourself. Morales had practice of getting money off of poor people. My stomach turned over. How much could I offer? What would Morales accept? What would he do if I had nothing? I needed every single peso. I couldn't give him a bribe that he was after. What good would it do to have only part of the money for my coyote? The captain moved down the line slowly. He pulled the two brothers with sports cap apart from each other. They had no papers. So he was worried that Javier will be caught or sent back at the check. But when the captain comes on the bus, oops, he begins to worry about himself. Okay. All right, let's see what else might be revealed. This was not an option. Morales would send them south to Guatemala along with the other young men who couldn't pull enough money out of their pockets. Included in this group was the black man that I couldn't figure out. He gave me a small, sad smile. He didn't seem surprised to be singled out in this way. Maybe this happened to him many times before. Finally, the captain stopped directly in front of the small. Ever so slowly, he pulled the shawl down from around her head, revealing her face. I had known that profile even 1,000 meters. Elena! I gasped. She turned and looked at me and whimpered, Miguel! The color drained from her face and lower lip began to tremble. She took one tentative step toward me, but the captain grabbed her arm and pushed her back roughly. Elena tripped on her shawl, falling to her knees. Well, here's our reveal, right? This chapter reveals that Elena had followed Miguel. And then we're going to add to this part, which is important. because let's see why this is important. Well, I mean, it's important because I have a question. Who's going to take care of the grandma? I don't know. I gotta keep reading. All right. Um, Captain Morales turned toward me. I could almost see his brain working very slowly. Who was Elena? Who was I? How were we connected? All he could figure out was that Elena wasn't who she pretended to be. Anyone in Mexico would know that her face didn't match the clothing that she wore. And then at that very moment, the Yankee capped young man, one of the brothers, muttered. He said it just loud enough for the captain to hear. A guy like Morales must have heard bad words many times in his career. He must have been called lots of names, but to be called a coward, that was the worst. So much for his machismo. I saw the captain's eyes change. The captain felt disrespected, and he had been disrespected enough for one day. I knew that he'd stopped trying to figure out who belonged to Mexico and who didn't. He didn't care who we were, where we came from, or where we were going. Morales would make us pay for his bad day. For the first time, I was afraid. Within moments, Captain Morales, which is important because, again, we look for these action words, right? Miguel is afraid that, okay, let's see. He escorted us onto the transport bus, all 15 men, I counted, plus Elena. No one protested. What would be the point? I sat once again next to Javier. I couldn't imagine how he felt. Having to go back a second time? Javi muttered quietly, repetitive and rhythmic phrases that I couldn't make out. Prayers, probably. Elena was in back of me. I felt her eyes bore into the back of my head, but I refused to turn and look at her. The bus chugged slowly to the south toward the border with Guatemala. I remained motionless for many hours, watching the sunset on the wrong side of the bus. Morales would dump us on the other side of the river. My plan, Don Clemente's carefully laid out plan, was in ruins, and Elena was to blame. Miguel is afraid that the plan won't work now that his sister ruined it. Okay, let's look at chapter 13. The bus stopped just once before the border, in the pitch black of the night. One by one, the Federales left the bus, walked away into the darkness, and quickly returned. I guess they were going to pee. Elena had never been able to wait to go, and I knew she was suffering with every bump in the road. Well, fine. She deserved to suffer. A little. As for me, my butt hurt, my neck ached, and my legs were cramped from being doubled up. Morales had forbidden us to stand or change seats. The complaining finally began. "Hey, Captain, let us out just for a minute," one called out. "What do you want, a big mess on the bus?" Morales sneered. He motioned for the driver to get going, sit back down, and pulled his cap over his eyes. Several men cursed him quietly. "They're no better than the worms that feed on dead corpses," Javi said sourly, nodding his head in the direction of our jailers. He rubbed his forehead with both his hands, and then he ran his hands through his hair, attempting to comb it with his fingers. He shrugged, raising his hands, palm up. "But their work will be for nothing. We all come back. All of us." Javier looked around the bus to confirm his opinion. "This isn't the first time for them either." And he pointed at the two brothers. Then he paused. "Or for them. It's a minor setback, nothing more." He motioned the black man across the aisle. "And that guy? He's come all the way from Brazil. Do you know how far that is? He's never let an idiot like Morales get in his way." Javier studied me curiously for a moment, and then he turned slightly in his seat to catch a glimpse of Elena. "Who's she? Your girlfriend? What are you going to do about her? She's a liability, you know. She's going to slow you down." Elena leaned forward, placing her chin on the edge of the seat. Her head was right between ours. "I won't slow anybody down because I'm traveling alone, and I am not his girlfriend. I am his sister. I already told him that I know what to do and he doesn't need to worry about me. Lena spoke to Javier. She said it as if I weren't even there. Actually, I said to Javi, ignoring Elena, she's only 13 years old, and you can tell what a baby she is by how she behaves. Now, I'll be forced to change all my plans and take her back home. She's so selfish. She doesn't even think that far ahead. Okay, so for this one, again, it's always Miguel. And what? Here is, right here is the action. He'll be forced to change his plans. Miguel will be forced to change his plans. Okay. All right. Let's see what that reveals or what else is going to come out. It's her fault we ended up like this, I continued. Most of us would be all the way to the border by now if it wasn't for her. I only half believe this, but I said it anyway to hurt Elena. It felt good to say things that I'd been thinking all night long. Javi was grinning. He didn't seem to care who won the argument. He was just enjoying the entertainment. It's not true. That ugly fat captain wouldn't have let me come back on the bus if Miguel hadn't called my name out the way he did. Elena's voice grew louder with each word. By then, half the bus was listening. And just who does he think he is? Really selfish? He's the one that was going to leave me all by myself. I know how to get north, and I'm going to do it. Elena stood up, gripping the metal edge of the seat with both hands. I'm not going to be stuck back in San Juanito, not ever, she screamed over my head. Captain Morales stood at the front of the bus. He stared long and hard at Elena, hitched up his pants, and yelled, "Shut up, all of you!" Morales turned back toward the driver. Just then the bus lurched. Morales lost his balance, and he reached for the seat nearest to him, missed the back, and fell on his knees in the aisle. He grunted and pushed himself up. His pants fell down. We could see almost most of his naked butt. Elena giggled quietly behind me. Javier's laugh began slow in his gut and then ended in a series of loud snorts that flew out of his nose like a donkey's bray. It ended in a giant wheeze. I began to laugh. I couldn't help it. Then everyone started to laugh with Javi and at Morales, and for a moment we didn't even care if Morales got back at us. But Morales made like it never happened. At the front of the bus, in front of us all, he adjusted his uniform jacket, his sweat-stained cap. He pulled up his pants once more, trying to get them over his bulging gut. Finally, he withdrew his pistol from his holster and inspected it casually. The barrel gleamed in the half-light of the dawning sun, glowing through the window of the bus. It was all an act, like his earlier shakedown, but it worked. Silence fell over the bus again. Javier's wheezing, that had begun with his laughter, hadn't stopped. His chest rose and fell with his efforts to take in air, but he didn't stop smiling. He leaned over and whispered in my ear, "I wonder if this guy is as stupid as he looks. I think he might be. I'm going to find out." With that, Javier scrunched down, settled his head against the metal edge of the back seat, and closed his eyes. I fell asleep with the sound of Javi's breaths and loud instant. Okay, so for my students, you are going to go into chapters 11, 12, and 13. So this one right here, instead of who, we can say this chapter reveals that Elena had followed Miguel, which is important because Miguel is afraid that his plans won't work now that his sister ruined it. And then we'll just go like this. This is important because Miguel will be forced to change his plans. Okay, so your answer should look something like that. And now I'm going to see you for chapter 14 and 15 in just a little bit.